This week on the Communicators, a discussion about expanding broadband in the United States with the current director of the Rural Utility Service, Jonathan Adelstein.
Well, former FCC Commissioner Jonathan Adelstein is now the administrator of the Rural Utility Service, and he joins us this week on the Communicators. Also joining us as the guest reporter is Howard Buskirk of Communications Daily. Administrator Adelstein, first of all, tell us what the Rural Utility Services does and what its role is when it comes to telecommunications policy.
Well, the Rural Utility Service was originally founded in 1935 as the Rural Electrification Administration. It is the FDR's creation of the New Deal that brought electricity to the rural countryside and transformed how people lived in farms and ranches across the United States. Today, we are still financing electricity to make sure that our electric grid is affordable and that it's smart and that it is reliable for everybody in rural America. We have 42 million people living in rural America that are experiencing better electricity because of the old REA. And today, we're also doing water programs and telecommunications programs. Since 1949, we began doing telephone service, financing rural telephone cooperatives. And we have, since that time, again, transformed the landscape in terms of telephone service, making sure that rural Americans have telephone service in every corner of the country by financing these small co-ops or small companies that come to us for loans. We also have a number of grant programs. Back when I was on Capitol Hill, I used to work for Senator Daschle, and we made sure that the Rural Utility Service had authority to do broadband. Worked very closely with Senator Harkin at the time, who was our advocate on the Agriculture Committee, and we transformed RUS into not just a telephone service provider, but a broadband provider. And since that time, over $1 billion in loans have gone out for broadband networks. There's also a distance learning telemedicine program that provides grants and loans for rural health clinics, rural hospitals, rural healthcare providers, as well as educational institutions to ensure that they're hooked up electronically. And it's a real progenitor of what we're seeing today with a vast commitment by the Obama administration in health IT. Now we're looking at what we've done and trying to see what lessons we can draw from that. We also have a Community Connect program, which provides grants to totally unserved communities, single small communities, towns under 5,000 that don't have broadband. Generally, they're even much smaller than that, very tiny communities that we can transform by hooking them up to a broadband pipe for the first time. So we've been doing telecommunications for 60 years, but never before have we had an opportunity like we're seeing under the Recovery Act, where the administration and Congress invested $2.5 billion into the Rural Utility Service for us to get broadband out to the most rural parts of the country, something we have a great deal of experience with.
Of that $2.5 billion from the 2009 Stimulus Act, how much has been allocated?
Well, so far we've awarded $1 billion and about $60 million in loans and grants combined throughout the United States. We did our first round of funding, which we just completed at the end of March, and we are now looking at our second round. We've accepted all the applications for our next round of funding, and we're really excited about that. But we've already got $1 billion under our belt of excellent investments. These are going to transform rural communities. They're going to bring broadband to people that didn't have it before, so that businesses can compete internationally, so that farmers and ranchers have access to real-time commodities information, so that small businesses can locate and grow. People that want to telecommute from rural areas and experience that quality of life will have that opportunity in many cases for the first time. Or in other cases, they're going to have expanded broadband, much quicker, much better service than they'd had previously.
How has the process gone so far?
Well, so far it's gone well. I mean, we found a lot of good applicants. There have been challenges. The way that we designed the first funding round, there were some issues that resulted in some applicants not being awarded funding that otherwise might have been good. So we have fixed that as we've developed a second round of funding, which, as I said, we just completed receiving the applications for. We're now beginning to review them. We learned a lot of lessons from what we did the first time. Everything that we put out the first time was an excellent application, but remember, we started with $18 billion and whittled it down to just
$18 billion in requests.
And whittled that down. And that was between us and the NTIA, the Commerce Department's wing, which we did a lot of joint applications with. In the first round, a lot of those applications were joint, and some people wanted to go to the Commerce Department, some people to the Agriculture Department based on what kind of application they had, and there was clear lines in the second round as to where people should go. So I think we've cleared up some of the issues. Like I say, all the applications that we awarded were all excellent ones. It's just that sometimes others weren't given every opportunity they might have had.
What can that money be used for if a company gets awarded a grant?
It's basically for infrastructure investment, for the cost of building out these networks. And that's not for operating expenses. We don't provide funding to deal with the day-to-day costs of running these networks. So we ensure, before we finance one of these projects, that they can be sustainable, that they have a business plan that works.
Howard Buskart.
Well, let me keep asking. It seems like that's one of the sexier things that RU has done for a while is these broadband grants. RUS is a relative. How many full-time employees do you have in your agency?
Well, our agency has about 700 people nationwide. We have about half of them, a little less than half in Washington, and we have field offices across the United States with field staff that help us run our water programs and the other programs, the telecom and the electric programs.
Has it been a strain for an agency that size to handle a program that's as big as the broadband grant program, loan grant program is?
It has really pushed our resources. I've got to say that we have risen to the challenge, but it has been a challenge. I mean, we are a relatively small, scrappy agency. The USDA, which we're part of, is 100,000 people, and we're just less than 1% of that. Still, we have a great deal of experience. As I said, for 60 years, we've been doing rural telecommunications. We've built up a very large portfolio of investments, over $55 billion in electric, water, and telecom loans that we currently have in our portfolio. All of those represent investments in better quality water, better quality electricity, and better quality telecom in rural America. Rural America would literally look completely different if it wasn't for what we've done with those people that we have and with those funds that we've been provided to transform the utilities landscape so that the infrastructure is there for rural development, for businesses to locate, for these towns to grow. So we know how to do this. We have the experience, but we've never had this kind of resources. This is an unprecedented load on us. Now we have hired up people temporarily as we were authorized to do under the Act. We hired an excellent consultant that's helped us weed through these, but ultimately we make the decisions. We review all of these things before they go out. We look at them with a fine-tooth comb. And it's actually an advantage to have a field operation. We've sent our people out from every state in the country before we made an award into the field, and we particularly focused on those applications we were about to award. Say they look pretty good to us, but go out there in the field and tell us, is there already service there? Is what we're getting in the application about the lack of current service really the case? So our people have worked overtime. They're burning the candle at both ends, and we're looking forward to September 30th when we finish this, and we're going to have a fiscal New Year party, because everybody's going to need a break.
And I also wanted to, I feel like I have to ask you about Bretton Woods, for example, because that's one case that's gotten a lot of attention. That's a ski area in New Hampshire. I think it would provide service to 400 ski chalets and that kind of thing. This is a program where there's far fewer dollars to award than grant applications. So I think some questions had come up about that particular grant that grant in particular. Can you talk us through that a little bit just to sort of answer those questions?
And start by telling us how much was granted to this community.
Sure, there's a community in northern New Hampshire, a very remote part of northern New Hampshire that's called Bretton Woods, famous from the Bretton Woods Agreement, where in the 40s there was a monetary agreement that was achieved at this historic hotel. We gave a little under $1 million to provide broadband to a place that didn't have broadband. Now, it is a remote part of the United States, more than 50 miles from any urbanized area. It's in the White Mountains, basically, of New Hampshire. It doesn't get a lot more rural and remote than that. Now, the issue is this community, that county that it's in, is one of the hardest hit by the economy. It has the highest unemployment in the state of New Hampshire, some of the lowest incomes, and the people in that community have been really devastated by the paper industry basically leaving town. One of the paper mills shut down. So it's a very strained economy. And the only thing that really is their future, as they see it, is tourism and second homes. Now, for tourism and second homes, you need to have broadband. If people are going to stay in that community, come to that community, spend more time, spend more money, giving people jobs, and the biggest employer in that community, of course, is the resort, then they have to have broadband. It's critical to their economic future. Our agency is all about rural economic development. And we look at a community and we say, what are the resources? What are the assets? And here is a beautiful part of the country up in the mountains, but it's remote. they need broadband for their future to be competitive, to make up for the loss of jobs in the paper and the timber industries, to replace that with modern jobs in tourism, in servicing the people that do come there for second home. So we think that's a good investment that's going to really benefit the future of northern New Hampshire.
And one final question on that. I think though, I think the symbolism was something that, and that was one of the few times I remember RUS being on the national news lately. Was that a public relations black eye at all? Or, I mean, are you getting questions about that when you go places?
Well, not really. I mean, I haven't gotten questions from anybody but the one outlet that ran the story. You know, it's a good grant. I mean, it's an important program. We're targeting places that don't have access. We're targeting places that are very remote. Now, this particular part of the area might have some advantages in terms of having a wonderful resort there and some ski chalets, but it also is the driver of the economy in the most hard-hit part of northern New Hampshire. So we need to get funds to those places. You can always take anything and twist it out of proportion and try to make it look like something that it's not, but if you look underneath the hood of this one, you find that it really meets our mission of serving rural economic development so that community can move towards a new economy.
Administrator Adelstein, why is there a limit of $10,000 per premise for a grant applicant?
Well, there's not a limit, it's a target. We don't want to spend more per premise because, generally speaking, there are technologies that can get to rural areas for that cost. And we want to, because it's Recovery Act funds, get to as many Americans as we possibly can. We need to make sure that we benefit as widely as we can with the funds we have in the short period of time we have. If there's a worthy project that needs more than that, there's a waiver process in place so that applicants can claim that they have special needs. They have, say, Native American populations. They might have very low median incomes or high unemployment. They can come to us and explain why, in particular, they need a larger amount of funds than the $10K per household.
And who is the person that decides that that can be changed from 10K?
Well, basically,
to increase in amount.
We have a waiver, and I would provide a waiver if there is a justification. I mean, we look at how would it impact rural economic development, how would it impact community facilities, is it needed for hospitals, public safety, things like that.
In round one, were there any waivers?
Well, there's no 10,000 limit in the first round, so that wasn't required. We put that in the second round.
Why?
Only. Well, it's something we looked at in the first round as an issue. And in the second round, as we were refining things, we decided we wanted to make sure we got the funds to as many of these communities as possible.
What is your estimate when it comes to rural households without broadband access right now?
Well, we think it's much higher for rural households than it is for urban households. It turns out that twice as many rural households don't have broadband as urban, and the estimate is somewhere around 5% for urban and twice as many don't have rural connections in rural areas, which would be 10%.
Is that because it's not available?
Well, there's a number of reasons. There's different factors. That's availability. That's just lack of access to broadband. It turns out broadband adoption in rural areas is also much lower. Broadband adoption in rural areas is 50% versus 68% nationwide. And just one of the factors there is the lack of availability. The fact that twice as many people can't get broadband in rural areas as urban areas is one factor, but also you have an older population in rural areas, and older populations tend to have less adoption of broadband, or people that actually subscribe. You have lower incomes on average in rural areas, and that's also a major factor, affordability. And perhaps there's less competition, meaning that prices are higher, so that the affordability issue becomes even more of a problem for people trying to subscribe. So there's a number of reasons that rural areas are behind. And we want to get to the place in America where there is no digital divide. This administration, the Obama administration, is absolutely committed to making sure that rural areas are every bit as connected as any other part of the United States.
How do you answer the argument that, well, okay, the broadband is available at all the households in the rural areas of America, but people still can't afford it? Can they get subsidies? Does your program currently allow for subsidization of the monthly costs?
Our program does not. Our program simply provides for the infrastructure. The Federal Communications Commission does have a universal service program that provides subsidies for both hookups and also for the cost of broadband service so that people get comparable service at comparable prices. And they've got further proposals they put out in their national broadband plan to refine how they go about doing that.
So what is your relationship in working with the FCC?
Well, the FCC is the expert agency in the federal government on broadband, so we rely on their expertise in a number of ways. We consult with them about various issues, but for the most part, when it comes to them setting policies, they are an independent agency, and the executive branch lets them do what it is that they think is best in their own public interest analysis.
Given that you served for several years as a commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission, has your vision changed, or is seeing things from a different perspective now?
Well, I'm actually working on some of the same issues. I've always really fought hard to make sure that rural America is second to none when it comes to broadband, and this is in some ways a continuation of that effort. One of the things we do have is, frankly, incredible data. We have all of the financial data on these firms because we're essentially their lending institution. Like I say, we're a $55 billion financial institution that really understands how these companies run. And so I have access now to exact pro formas, to the balance sheets, to the income flows. So I know how reliant these companies are on universal service and how reliant they are on inter-carrier compensation, for example, how one phone company compensates another one for the use of its network. So I always understood these things, but I didn't have the data that we have now, and that's data that we're willing to share with the FCC as it goes through the process of evaluating how to make changes in these programs that could affect our borrowers. After all, their policies can affect our borrowers in dramatic ways, and we're very concerned about protecting our portfolio. The taxpayers have over $5 billion portfolio of loans to rural telecommunications companies, and we have less than a 1% default rate. We're very proud of how carefully we manage the taxpayer funds, but we want to make sure that that continues into the future.
This is C-SPAN's Communicators program. Our guest is Rural Utility Service Administrator Jonathan Adelstein. Next question from Communications Daily's Howard Buskirk.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the scope of the program. I mean, I think this is a total of $7 billion, a little more than $7 billion between RUS and NTIA, but some would say a big national problem. You know, some of the carriers point out that, for example, AT&T spends like $20 billion a year on capital expenditures. How much of a difference is this amount of money going to make relative to the size of the gap in the U.S. right now?
Well, there is a big gap, and we are committed over the long haul, not just through this program, but other programs, to continuing to address it. We're not going to solve all of the rural broadband problems with this program. There is a lot to do, but it's a major investment that's being made. And our Secretary Tom Vilsack, has made this one of his pillars at USDA of what is needed for rural communities going forward to succeed. They have to have broadband. So our commitment doesn't end on September 30th when these funds run out. We have existing ongoing programs. We do nearly $1 billion a year in loans to rural telecom companies, and all of the infrastructure we finance is broadband capable. We have the distance learning telemedicine program. We have a Community Connect program that provides for broadband. So we recognize there's an ongoing need, and we've had programs going on for 60 years, and for many more years to come, we're going to continue to make this a critical element, as Secretary Vilsack has indicated, of USDA's commitment to rural communities, to making sure that they can be sustainable economically, that people can invest in those communities knowing that they have the infrastructure going forward that they need to support business development.
And I feel like I should also ask you about the current program. There were a lot of questions as it unfolded. For example, applicants had a lot of trouble making filings in the first round. There were some mechanical problems, and there were a lot of complaints with the second funding round that people didn't even know whether they had won or who had won, because both NTIA and RUS were kind of late in getting the word out on notices of who actually was getting money. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know this was a big job and a difficult job for you guys to try to take on.
Yeah, the first round I was very disappointed with. I got into the job, and almost my first week we had a meltdown in the application process, the technology. We had a contractor that was doing the work that was not really processing things properly. Servers were down, people were having trouble applying. We ended up extending the deadline by a week, but it was still a messy process, and one that I was actually committed to ensuring we didn't replicate in the second round. In the second round, our contractor completely changed how they did business, made sure there was adequate capacity. We didn't get any reports of major technological difficulties in the second round. So I'm pleased to report we had a better result there. Now, there were some concerns in the second round about did we get all the awards out in the first round. The fact is, in order to deal with that, we gave people more time to apply. We extended the deadline by 2 weeks so that everybody had over a month from RUS's perspective knowing where our awards were going out. We posted where all the awards were by the end of February, and the application deadline wasn't until March 31st. So all applicants had over a month to know exactly where first round applicants were going to be before they had to make a decision about how to make their application work. We also gave people a lot more time to study the applications. In the first round, we put the NOFA out very quickly. This time, we put the NOFA out January 15th. People had a month until March 15th when, I'm sorry, we put it out a little earlier than that. So people had much more time than they otherwise would have had in order to study our NOFA, to know what it was that we were doing. And we see the results in our application pool. We're seeing more complete applications. We're seeing better data. We gave people 6 weeks from January 15th until March 31st to fill these things out, 45 days. So it was much more than the 30 days we had in the first round. And besides that, we had the NOFA out earlier. So I think we've really done a good job of giving people more time. Let me go over that timeline again, just to make it clear. January 15th, we published the NOFA so that everybody could read it. And they had a full month to read it between then and February 15th when we opened the window. Then they had 45 days between February 15th and March 31st to apply. Much more time than was available in the first round. So we dealt with those concerns. I think we learned, and there were issues in the first round. It definitely did not go as well as I'd hoped. And that was also reflected in the applicant pool. There were more mistakes, there was more errors.
But you think the second round went much better than the first round in your view, right?
Well, absolutely. I think the applicants will tell you that in terms of the experience of applying, the technology worked, the application was streamlined, it was clear, people knew what they were doing. We learned a great deal from the first round, and I think in the second round it's better, and it shows. I mean, the first round, as I said, we had some issues that applicants didn't get through all of the hurdles. In the second round, we're seeing far fewer issues as we're doing the initial reviews of the applications.
And one final question. Can you tell us when can we expect to see the second round awards made in the summertime frame, or and how hard is that schedule right now?
Well, it's a pretty hard schedule. We've got to have all the funds obligated by September 30th. So we're going to probably start making awards in, I'd say, mid-July, not much before then. We may make a few before then, but the bulk of them we're probably going to start doing in real large amounts in mid-July through mid-August. We'll get most of them out so that we have time to go through all the mechanics of getting all the papers signed and everything obligated by the September 30th date. By September 30th, these funds basically expire. So they have to be used by then in order to benefit rural communities to make sure that we get that broadband where it needs to be. And we know, as you said, that the demand is greater than the available supply, so we want to make sure that all good applications get in queue and get funded and get signed, sealed, and delivered by the
So they have to be in applicants' hands by September the 30th, or the funds go away, is that right?
Not all the funds actually go into the applicants' hands, but the funds have to be obligated, so there has to be a commitment from the federal government. We actually don't provide the funding until the projects are actually underway, and we provide funding in tranches. So as they need the funding, we will forward it to make sure that all the funds are properly used. So we don't cut a check up front to the applicants or the awardees. We do it as they need the funds in order to actually build out the projects.
Administrator Adelstein, one of the specific criticisms of the funding process, the grant process, came from Matt Polka of the American Cable Association. Just part of the letter that he wrote to you. Cable operators' only offense was to fund their operations without the necessity of previous RUS loans, for which they are now being penalized in the second round scoring process for broadband stimulus funding.
We're not penalizing anybody. I mean, we are thrilled to have cable companies participate, and I really like to see them. As a matter of fact, we gave awards to cable companies in the first round. Allen's TV cable service, for example, received a loan grant combination of over $7 million to provide fiber to the home for its 4 current cable TV systems. And other cable companies won awards for doing coax cable infrastructure. So we welcome cable applicants. We see all kinds of a diversity of applicants and awardees. In the first round, we're seeing a lot of different applicants in the second round. Our statute does say that we are to give preference to our current borrowers. This is something that Congress asked us to do because, as I said, we have a very large loan portfolio and Congress wants to see that stable, so they want to give a preference to existing borrowers to make sure that their systems are shored up. But that is by no means a penalty for everybody else. And as a matter of fact, most of our applicants in the second round are not our current borrowers. So we're seeing that in the second round as we did in the first round, and there's really no discrimination.
Did the federal court decision on the Comcast BitTorrent issue, some scholars say that it effectively negates net neutrality. Does that affect your work at the RUS?
No, we remain committed to open networks. If we're going to finance these projects through taxpayer funds, we want to make sure that they're open networks, and we remain steadfastly committed to doing that.
Howard Buskirk?
Maybe if we move off the grant program, I wanted to ask you a process question or two to tell us how is it different being an administrator at RUS than it was being an FCC commissioner? I mean, how does your job compare now to what the job you were doing before?
Well, I thought it was pretty tough being an FCC commissioner, but this job's actually a lot harder. We're running a big organization. I'm doing it rather than being independent as I was at the FCC. I was my own boss of a small little operation and a member of a board, essentially, where we were deciding policy. But at the FCC, the chairman is by law the CEO. Now I'm running this agency. As I said, it's a fairly large agency. We're doing over $13 billion in grants and loans this year to shore up rural infrastructure, to put in better electric infrastructure, water, and telecom. So it's a big job with a lot of responsibilities that are managerial and operational in nature. So they're not, the policy questions are very large, but the management questions in many ways loom even larger in terms of my time, ensuring we have adequate staffing, that we have the right resources that we need to do the job we have, making operational decisions about how we're going to process various things, who's going to do what and how it's going to get done. It's a very different set of questions to be managing a large organization. And it's also different being part of the executive branch. It's something I've always wanted to do. It's very exciting because I have an excellent Secretary of Agriculture that I work for in Tom Vilsack. He is a hands-on person who reads voluminous amounts of material, really is engaged and involved, deeply committed to getting broadband out to the rural parts of the country, deeply committed to rural development. So it's an exciting opportunity to work as part of a team. I mean, I enjoyed the independence at the FCC, but if you're going to be in a team, I like that too. And having excellent leadership that we have at USDA and at the White House, because we're working regularly with them to ensure they know what we're doing and are apprised, it's just a real treat to be part of that whole executive branch team and seeing how they're dealing with various challenges. It really expands how I look at the whole government.
Final question from you.
Do you miss the sort of rough and tumble policy making and arguments over things like net neutrality and all that went on at the FCC, or is that compensated by the stuff you're able to do at RUS?
Well, we have plenty of big policy debates in front of us at RUS. Remember, we're also dealing with a bunch of areas I wasn't dealing with at the FCC, and some of them are related. Like in electric, we're dealing with smart grid. And it's really a sweet spot for RUS because we're doing the telecom to rural areas that will provide the opportunity for our electric borrowers, the rural electric co-ops, to upgrade their electrical systems to do smart grid so that they can manage their grid. They can help consumers to manage their electrical use. So I'm learning all about energy policy. Water, we're putting out over $4 billion this year in grants and loans to rural water systems. And I'm just amazed by the needs out there of these communities that don't have running water, that have open lagoons for sewage. And we're dealing with these crises in rural America to protect the environment. Here it's around Earth Day now, and it's a whole new set of challenges, both from a policy and an operational point of view. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to expand my role in government, to continue what's been over a 20-year lifetime of public service now. I started on Capitol Hill, and then I moved to an independent agency, which gave me a great perspective, but I always wanted to be part of the executive branch. And so when President Obama was elected, I was thrilled to be made a part of that administration, to work at it from an executing point of view, from a management point of view, from running these programs that are rubber on the road in rural America to make sure that they have their basic needs met for electricity, for water, for telecommunications. These are the underpinnings of the future viability of not just rural America, but our national economy as a whole. So we're in the middle of both operational challenges and policy questions, so never a boring moment where I am today.
And finally, Administrator Adelstein, let's bring it around to where we started, which is with the Rural Electrification Service. Does broadband compete at the same level as electric and water when it comes to utilities?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, you look back at the history of electricity in America and how we brought it there, and that's what changed the ability for people to have economic growth in rural areas. And then it was the highways and the railroads originally. These infrastructure programs, as they were built out to rural America, affected where growth went, where jobs went. And today, broadband is equally important. If you don't, just as when the highway passed you by and didn't go to your city would just deteriorate. Or when the railroad didn't go in earlier times. Now, if you don't have broadband, then businesses won't locate there. It's that crucial, and the town's undergirding is really threatened if they don't have broadband. And it's not just that town. As that town dies, there's a source of revenue, there's a source of jobs, there's a source of people going somewhere different and creating economic wealth for this country. Other countries that are much larger than ours take advantage of every one of their citizens, and we have to do that here in the United States. We have over 50 million people living in rural America, and we need to draw on the talents and potential of each one in order to meet our national needs, in order to compete globally in the economy. So it is just as important that they have broadband today as it was that they had electricity in days past and that they had transportation service. It connects the nation as a whole. What's especially thrilling for me is to be part of the agency that brought electricity to rural America. Now that we're the ones that bringing the next great technological revolution, the great infrastructure challenge of our time, broadband, to every corner of this country.
Jonathan Adelstein is the administrator of the Rural Utilities Service. Howard Buskirk is with Communications Daily, Associate Managing Editor. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.